Not too long ago, we painted up the quad bike from the Jackals for our Genestealer Cults Combat Patrol. And we now need to push that a little bit further. Last time we did a little bit of weathering, a bit of rusting and things like that, testing out a few products. And we're going to be going deeper down that rabbit hole today by painting up the other 4 bikes in the Jackals unit. So, with 4 bikes to go, let's not waste any time and jump straight in. To kick it off for the bikers, we are going to be naturally starting with, well, the bikes. And here they're all going to be painted in different methods and styles, but they're all starting from the same place, which is a zenithal prime. From here, let's kick off with the first bike, and we're going to want to build up a nice base coat using a brown contrast. This should go on really nicely, giving us some dark shadows, while making the raised surface areas a nice brown. While we have contrast on the brain and the contrast tray out, let's give the wheels a nice base coat of a black contrast, and this is going to separate them nicely from the body of the rest of the bike. Now, we could have used black contrast instead of a brown contrast for this base coat, but on this particular bike, we're going down the route of gold, bronze, and that sort of worn metal look. So that means that by using a brown, what we have is an advantage of any recesses areas that we've missed don't stand out as starkly as they do with black. So it's just a case of grabbing your favourite bronzy goldy tones and getting to work. We can take our favourite dark bronze and we will apply this in an overbrush fashion across all of the bike mechanical sections. This will nicely pick out most of the flat and raised surface areas in a nice metallic gold flake, while leaving the dark brown in the recesses. We can use a reasonable sized brush for this, and we just need to be careful not to hit other elements like the rider predominantly. Once we are happy with the coverage of this first round of heavy overbrushing, we can switch out for a brighter, more poppy gold tone. This can then be overbrushed as well, but we are looking to be a little bit more precise and a little bit careful on this round, mainly hitting the raised areas of the bike, giving us a nice pop of brightness across the model. Overbrushing this point shouldn't take too long. Roughly it took me about 3 to 4 minutes to do both layers of the overbrushing. So in reality, I probably spent more time waiting for the brown contrast base coat to dry than I did in the actual overbrushing, because it's a nice quick technique. Anyway, tangent over, what we're going to do now is add a little bit of more wear, chipping and things like that, as well as picking out some particular details using a silver. Using a medium dark silver, we want to work around the model. First, we can add a variety of sections, painting whole areas in silver metal. Here we're going to be picking out things like the shock absorbers and the front connections. Beyond that, we can carefully work around, doing a few edge highlights on some of the metal areas, trying to make it a relatively scratchy highlight. Once all of the metals have been applied and they are 100% fully dried, we are going to add a little bit of definition and harmony back in, and we're going to be doing that with a quick wash of a dark muddy green, which will pull away some of that shine from the metal and also pick out some nice details in those recesses. Naturally, this wash is going to take a little bit of time to dry, so while it does, let's talk about the riders, which is going to be the cohesive nature and product and item across the entire army. How we're doing it is the vehicles and accessories can be whatever we want, but the riders will be, for lack of a better word, in a uniform, tying the whole army together in a nice army. So, nice and simple. The Hive Fleet that we're going for this particular army is Chronos, which means red and black. So, for painting our riders, just grab some nice dark black contrast and a dark red contrast, and we can start on the riders themselves. We are going to start off the riders by blacking out the undersuit. So this is going to be things like the legs, the boots and the arms. We just want to make sure that we're not catching any of the raised plates or rib armor sections. Just the levers is what we're targeting here. This can be done easily with a black contrast. From there, we're going to start base coating the other elements. For all of the items across the waist, so his holster and various pouches, these are going to get a brown contrast applied so they don't stick out too much from the blacks around them. Then all of the armor plates that we avoided on the round of black contrast will get a layer of a dark red contrast, making sure to get a nice coat here so there's no elements of prime showing. If you fancy spending a little bit more time and also pushing it a little bit further, what you could do is, when doing the black contrast section, avoid the straps on the various elements like the armor plates that link them together. This can then be picked out independently with the brown contrast, which will tie that waist section in with other elements across the model, and it will give you a little bit more variation. Naturally, if you're going to be doing that when we come to the highlighting in not too long, you're going to need to take that into account and spend a little bit more time doing the highlighting as well. So while you're down wherever the bottom of this video is, hopefully subscribing, why not actually go to the comments as well? Let us know, would you paint these straps in the alternate color to get that variation? Or would you save the time and, as we've done here, just give it a complete coat of black? We've just spent a little bit of time on the rider now, so let's jump back to the bikes, and we're going to be running through the base coats for the rest of the bikes. Starting off with bike number 2, similar to the first bike, we're going to be kicking it off with a brown contrast base coat. But whereas prior this was followed up with a bronze tone, here we're swapping that out and going straight for the medium silver. This can be overbrushed straight across the dried brown contrast to give us a really nice quick metallic area. From here we can jump across to applying a wash, and this is going to be a blue-green wash, which should give us a really nice subtle blue metal look and pick out the recesses nicely. Then for bike number 3, we can switch up a little, going for a complete coat of bronze instead of going down the contrast route. This will take a couple of coats to get a nice color and coverage, and once we have that clean coat of our chosen bronze, we can go in and add some shading in the quick application of a purple wash. As always, when we're applying washes, we want to make sure that there's not too much pooling across the model, and we wick away any excess. As normal with washes, applying them over a metallic will make that metallic de-shine a little bit, which makes sense. We're putting a semi-translucent thing over the top of it that isn't reflective, so it's going to knock down that shine, making it slightly duller and slightly older, which for our purpose is great. Now with the wheels on all of these bikes, essentially we did the same as we did with the first, just gave it a nice dark contrast cover, which meant that it stood out from the rest of the bike. Whatever color we were using, we could use a brown or a black for the tires. Really nice and simple. With that said, we need to get on with the riders, but we've only got one bike left to base coat. So let's do that first, and then we can tackle highlighting the riders. We will be starting off with contrast for this method. So once more, let's grab a dark black contrast and use this to base coat the last bike, giving us an excellent platform to build some metals on top of. What we want to do is grab a medium silver, and this can be applied in smooth coats across the model, giving us a similar outcome to the last bike, but this time purely in silver. We can then apply a black wash over the entirety of the metal areas, giving us our final base coated bike. You might notice during that the silver base coat shines slightly better than the bronze base coat, and personally I think that's because we went over a black or dark undercoat. I tend to find that metallics shine better over a darker base coat than they do over, for example, the zenithal, which is why I think we needed a few more coats of the bronze than we did silver to get a nice clean coverage. With that said though, the bikes are all done, so let's go back and start highlighting all of those riders. We can start by mixing together our red contrast from the base coat with a brighter poppier red. This mix can then be applied as a broad highlight across all of the armour, picking out all the raised ribbed areas and any of the large flat panels. This gives us a nice transition to the last highlight, which was applied in more of a narrow selective fashion, catching only the sharpest of points using the pure red from our mix. For standard troops, this will hopefully be bright enough, and then we can move across to highlighting the undersuit. Here we're going to be taking our black contrast and mixing in some flesh tone at roughly a 70 to 25% mix. This can then be applied across all of the edges of the clothing, so we're looking at ridges on folds and edges of any sculpted details. This simply leaves the waistband, and similar to the blacks, what we want to do is mix a little bit of skin tone into our contrast base, and then use this to pick out all of the edges and corners. This allows us to finish off the trousers, the levers and the waistband with a black wash, nicely recess shading and redarkening the areas. With the riders basically done, let's jump back to the bikes. But before we do, let's have a look at how they were before we apply any fun techniques and fun weathering. So overall, we've got here, to be honest, some really nice base coated bikes, and we could potentially run them as they are here. We wouldn't need to add any extra details and effects, but naturally we're going to be. So let's grab some fun effects and do some slight tweaking to give some wear, tear and personal aesthetic to these bikes. Starting off with the bronze bike, here we're going to be adding what looks like a worn top coat of paint, and we're going to be doing this in green. The first pass is going to be with a dark green, applied in a broad and rough stippling manner. This will hopefully give us a nice patchy coverage, mainly building up on some of the flatter sections and a couple of the edges. We then want to go slightly brighter, grabbing a brighter green and applying a more focused and narrow stippling method, targeting the centers of the green masses we've already made to build up a little bit of brightness. I do really like this method as a quick and approachable way to make what looks like chipped metal. Essentially what we're doing is painting the rusty bronzy section first, then we're going over and applying the paint and we're recreating what looks like the brightest sections is what would have been that top coat, which has then slowly darkened and started to rust, which we've already built in with the rest of the painting. Now there are other ways. We're going to be moving on to the second bike, and this one we're using a chipping medium to recreate the issues, rust and wear and tear that we want to create on the bike. We want to apply the chipping medium across all of the areas of metal on the bike that we want to color or apply a top coat of paint to. And this will be a clear medium that once dry, paint should go over nicely. Unlike last time, here we're going to be applying full coverage coats, in this case starting from a grey. Once all the panels are covered, we're going to start highlighting it back up with a white. This white can pick out large sections of panels, but naturally we do also want to do a broad highlight, catching all of the edges and, as I said, panels to give that pop of white. Now the whites are going to take a little bit of time to dry, so while it does, let's talk about some chipping medium. Now my understanding is this is a paint medium, but you can essentially apply a base coat of it first. And unlike most mediums, this is one that will reactivate. Most of the time reactivation isn't great for the hobby because we don't want things we've worked on and we've got it where we want it to reactivate. But this is clear and we use it as a base coat. Because it reactivates, once we've applied paint on top of it, all we have to do is come back with some clean water, brush this across the area, and it will hopefully reactivate the undercoat underneath our painted white in this case. What that then means is we can start to scrape away any of that because the base coat the white is adhered to is reactivated and coming loose. So we can remove any of the white we want really easily. So with that said, the white should be dry and let's go back and start obliterating it from the model. As I said, all it takes is a quick brush of clean water over the areas where we've applied the paint and the paint can start to be pulled away. I want this to be relatively intensive. So rather than being precise using a fine tool like a toothpick, we are going to be coming in with a rough makeup brush. And we're going to be using this to scrub away large sections of the paint, leaving smaller scattered paint chipped sections. Once we've scrubbed off the desired amount of paint, we want to leave it to dry fully. This is because we are going to be coming back with a few more steps later on. The first step being a black wash, which will pick out all of the recesses for us, which may have been covered up slightly with some of the white flakes we've removed. Then with this wash dry, we want to add some final patina. Since this bike's base coat was a coppery brass tone, we can apply some verdigris to some of the areas. Mainly the ones that we're looking at targeting are areas where water might build up and sit, which would then result in blue oxidization. Once we've added this popper-teal across the bike, we can set it aside to dry. The chipping medium method is by far one of the easiest methods I found of doing this, but it's one of the hardest ones to be able to control and use nicely. For this example, it was really easy. We were mainly targeting to obliterate most of the paint and leave very little on the model. So for us, that was great. But I personally prefer to use the first method of stippling because we do have a little bit more control and it's a little bit more precise. With that said, we've got to go on to the third bike now. And this next method, again, is quite an easy one with slight less precision. And what we're going to be doing is grabbing an enamel wash and using this as our rust effect. If we're going for orange rust, we need to go for silver metal. And as I said, this process is quick and easy. We want to take our enamel wash and apply a thick coat of this across all of the model's metal areas. This will turn the entire bike into a dark rusty brown. Once we have all of the areas covered, we want to wait a few minutes for it to partially dry and solidify, and then we can grab a sponge and start to carefully pull away most of the wash using this soft sponge. Once we have worked around the bike, removing as much as the wash as we would like to, we can then leave it to dry, grab our next bike, which is going to be the blue steel bike, and start on that. Before we jump into the last bike, I do just want to point out the fact that we're using a specific product here. Normally, I don't think that the exact product matters, but in this case, it might do. I'm not aware of another product that works in this way. This isn't a sponsored product, don't worry, but I just thought I'd highlight it because normally I just have the name I'm using, and I often say you can swap it out for any color or product that's similar. This, I don't know of another one. So if you do help me out. Let me know down in the comments below. But this product is U-Rust, and essentially it's a two-part process. What we do is apply down this bottle of U-Rust first, and then there's a couple of different activators we can get that once this is dried on the model, we can apply that activator across it and it will change the properties of the paint. So as I said, I'm not aware of another one that works in this way, and if you do, let me know down below. With that said, we can now jump on to the final bike. For this application, we want to apply our first rust product to all of the areas where we want rust. This is a textured paint and seems to include small textured metals inside the medium. I tend to find the denser this material is, the more rust that ends up showing, but naturally you have more texture. Once the rust has been applied and has dried, what we want to do is go over with our second activator paint. In this case, we're using activator type 2. This can be applied as a wash or a glaze over the sections that we've initially applied this rust paint. Just a quick coat over this, and then we can pop it down, let it dry while it reacts. And yes, I think react is the correct word here. I think what we're actually doing is applying a paint that is medium with paint flakes of actual metal that can oxidize. And then what we're doing is by applying the reactor or the activator, which is in our case type 2, what we're doing is causing the metal flakes in that to formally oxidize, which is what the rusting process is. So the reason that this looks compellingly like rust is because it is actual rust. Obviously the disadvantage of this is we're kind of bound by the size and scale of the pigments they use, which might not be particularly perfect for every project. I think this would be better on bigger, more meatier vehicles, potentially the Ridge Runner that comes in the kit, so we might tackle it with that later on. With that all said, we have some last little bits left to do. At this point, the little bits left to do come down to the skin of the riders, but overall I did cover this in another vehicle which is going to be linked up, or you may already have watched. In this case, the other minor elements are going to be things like the headlights. And here what we can do is go down and avoid the metallic lines and connectors that are in front of the lights, but put in a dot of white on the lenses and sources of light. Once that's down, we can go in and give a neon paint coverage. Here we're going for green in the form of the Games Workshop Tesseract Glow, which gives us a really quick, efficient glow effect around the area where it builds up. And that leaves us with a complete set of 4 bikes ready to be added to our previously painted ATV. So let's see how they came out. Personally, I really like the approach that we've taken here. We've been able to add in loads of different pops of color variation and effects across the unit without them being the same, and they still look as a cohesive unit, tied together by the riders being in a similar uniform. If we add back in the quad bike from the other week, I think this fits in as well, which gives me confidence that we can paint up the rest of the combat patrol in this style, allowing me to paint every model leader in a slightly higher level and any style or color that I like, as long as the overall uniform is the same. Now, this isn't the only video I've done that focuses on weathering. In fact, I've done a video solely on weathering and different techniques to achieve different styles of weathering. So if you've enjoyed this video and you want to, well, use different weathering styles potentially, why not check out this video here where we do exactly that. Otherwise, do remember to subscribe so that we can see you next time.